Section 18 of A Book of Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Book of Fairy Tales by Sabine Baring-Gould. Jack the Giant Killer. In the days of King Arthur there lived in Cornwall a lad named Jack, who loved to hear the wonderful deeds done by King Arthur and the knights of his Round Table, which were greatly noised abroad. Jack did not see why he himself should not achieve as great adventures as Sir Launcelot du Lac, Sir Gawain, or Sir Kay. At this time there lived many giants in Cornwall. Not far from Jack's father's house, on the top of St. Michael's Mount, lived one who was the terror of the neighbourhood. His name was Cormoran, and he had a voracious appetite. When he required food, he came down from his castle, and seizing on the flocks and herds of the poor people, would cast an ox over his shoulder, and stuff his wallet with sheep, and stride back to his dwelling thus supplied. This had been his manner of life for many years, and the country round Mounts Bay was nearly ruined through him. After Cormoran had stuffed himself well with meat, he usually remained at home for a good many days, till his supply was exhausted. Jack took advantage of this circumstance, and one night he dug a deep pit before the gateway into the castle, and covered it with sticks and heather, and over that he laid sods of turf. When this was done he blew a loud blast with his horn, and this roused Cormoran from sleep. He issued from his castle in a great rage, and when he saw Jack he roared with a voice of thunder, "Who are you, that you dare to disturb me?" Then he charged from his gate with great strides, so as to catch Jack and kill him. But the very second step he took, he went headlong into the pitfall Jack had prepared for him. Jack at once ran to the side of the pit, and as the giant tried to scramble out, he aimed at him with his pickaxe, cleft his skull, and the ogre fell back dead. Jack now ran home in great glee to tell his friends what he had done. The whole country was moved at the news, and resolved to show to Jack some token of gratitude for having delivered it from such an encumbrance. They therefore presented him with a sword and belt, on which was written in pearls, "This is the valiant Cornishman, who slew the giant Cormoran," and they named him Jack the Giant Killer. But this only whetted Jack's desire to achieve fame and kill giants. The news of what he had done had reached the ears of another equally greedy giant, named Blunderbore, and he resolved on chastising Jack for having killed Cormoran. Jack heard of this, and he therefore resolved on being beforehand with Blunderbore, by attacking him before he got under way to punish him. The giant lived in a castle in the depths of a great forest. Jack started in quest of him, and shortly before reaching the castle, sat down to drink of a clear stream that sprang out of the rock, and as the day was warm, and Jack had walked a long way, he fell asleep. Whilst he was in this state, Blunderbore came to the spring to fill his pitcher, and seeing a youth lying there, he stopped and read what was written on his belt. "Ha, ha!" roared the giant, as he caught him up. "Now I have got you, and you shall not escape me." Jack awoke with a start to find himself in the grip of the giant. He pretended to be still asleep, and the giant carried him into his castle, and threw him into a dungeon. Whilst Jack lay there he heard many sighs and groans issuing from other prisons, and a voice which said, "Haste, gallant stranger, haste away, before you fall the giant's prey. He's gone abroad, but with another. He'll soon return, his savage brother. A monster dread and cruel who will torture ere he butchers you. Then, gallant stranger, haste away, ere you become the giant's prey." "That is all very good advice," said Jack, "but somewhat impracticable. When I am locked up in prison, how can I get away?" He crawled up into his window and looked out. Then he saw the giant Blunderbore, who had gone away, was returning with another giant more hideous than himself. Jack, perceiving in one corner of his dungeon a very stout cord, used for binding prisoners, he made a slip knot at each end, and as the giants walked under the castle walls, he threw the loops over their heads, pulled them tight, and tied the cord to his window bars. You may believe that the giants struggled, kicked, but the more they struggled, the tighter grew the slip knots, and at last they were quite choked and dead. He now pulled at that bar of his window to which the giants had been attached, and which they in their struggles had almost torn out of its socket. He easily slipped between it and the next bar, and finished the giants with his sword. Then seizing the keys which hung from the belt of Blunderbore, He entered the castle and examined all the prisons. In one he found 3 ladies hung by the hair of their heads to nails, and almost starved to death. Jack at once released them, and asked how they came to be there. They informed him that the giant had killed their husbands, and then had hung them up as Jack had seen, that they might starve. Jack then very gallantly offered them the keys of the castle, and bade them live there. He then bade them farewell, and departed for Wales. Jack now travelled as fast as he could. At length he reached a handsome mansion, and knocked at the door. Then out came a Welsh giant. He was rather dismayed at this, but did not allow the giant to see it. He said he was a traveller who had lost his way, and that he sought a night's lodging. Thereat the giant welcomed him and escorted him in, and gave him a room with a good bed in it. Jack undressed and went to bed, but could not sleep, although he was very weary. Presently he heard the giant walking backwards and forwards in the next room, muttering to himself, "Though here you lodge with me this night, you shall not see the morning light, for with my club I will kill you quite." "Oh, is that your intention?" thought Jack. "I must see if my wits will help me." Then he got out of bed and put a great log of wood in his place, and concealed himself in a corner. About midnight the giant entered the room, and with his cudgel struck several heavy blows on the bed, and the very place where Jack had laid the log. After that, thinking he had killed the sleeper, he stumped back to his own room. Early in the morning Jack put a bold face on the matter, and walked downstairs and found the giant at breakfast, and very much surprised the ogre was at seeing him. "Hullo," said he, "you here? How did you sleep last night?" "Pretty well," answered Jack. "I should have slept better had not a rat given me 3 or 4 slaps with its tail." This speech mightily surprised the giant, but he said nothing. He then brought out 2 huge bowls of hasty pudding, one of which he set before Jack, and the other he took himself. Jack, instead of eating his, contrived to pour it down his neck into a leather bag which hung before him. When they had finished, Jack said, "Now I can do what you cannot. I can run a knife in here," pointing to his bag, "without killing myself." He then seized the knife, plunged it into the leathern bag, and out fell the pudding. The giant was surprised at this, and not liking to be outdone in such a matter, he also seized the knife, plunged it into his body, and died on the spot. Now Jack ransacked his house, and found in it 4 great treasures: a cloak which would make those who wore it invisible, a cap of knowledge which when put on told one all one desired to know, a sword of sharpness that would cut through anything it touched, and shoes of fleetness which when worn made the wearer run like the wind. Jack now took these 4 treasures and went on his way. He travelled over high hills and moors, and came to a forest whence he heard cries issue. He went in their direction, and saw a giant dragging along a knight and his lady by the hair of their heads. Jack alighted off his horse, tied him to an oak tree. Then he put on his invisible cloak, under which he carried the sword of sharpness. When he came up to the giant he made several strokes at him, but could not reach his body, but wounded his legs in many places, and he continued hacking till he had cut through the leg bones, and then down tumbled the giant, when he at once ran his sword of sharpness into his body and killed him. The knight and his lady thanked Jack for their deliverance, and invited him to their castle. "No," said Jack, "I cannot be satisfied until I have found out the habitation of this monster." So he remounted his horse and rode away, and in time came to a mountain. When he drew near he saw bones lying about, and knew that he was close to the dwelling of a giant. So he put on his invisible cloak, and ascended the mountain till he reached a cave, at the door of which sat a giant, who was saying, "I wonder where my brother can be. He promised to bring a good fat knight and a plump lady for our day's meal." The giant was a hideous monster, with eyes as fierce as those of a wild boar. He had shaggy cheeks and a long beard, the hairs of which were like wire. Jack walked up to him, and aimed a blow with his sword, which cut off the giant's nose. He jumped up yelling, and looked about him, but he could not see his adversary. Jack now sprang on the giant's seat, and aimed at his back, and pierced him through, so that he uttered a groan and died. Jack then cut off his head, and sent it along with that of his brother to King Arthur. Having thus slain these 2 monsters, Jack entered the cavern, and passed through several chambers in succession, till he reached one in which was a boiling cauldron, and a table ready set for the giants to eat their meal on it. He now heard doleful cries of captives, and following the sound came to a cavern all round the walls of which were cages, in which a number of persons were kept. When they saw him, they cried out, "Are you also come to be put in a cage and fattened for food?" Jack replied, "Fear nothing, I am come to release you all. I have killed the 2 giants, and have sent their heads to King Arthur." The poor prisoners shouted with joy when they heard this. They had expected only death. Jack now undid the doors of their cages, and let them out. Jack next went to the treasure cave of the giants, and found there many bags full of money. This he divided equally among the captives he had released, and then bade them all return to their homes. Jack now went to the castle of the knight and his lady, whom he had delivered, and was received with great joy. The knight made a great feast for Jack, and at the conclusion presented him with a ring, in which was a picture of his deliverance of him and the lady from the giant, and these lines beneath: "Behold, in dire distress were we, under a giant's fierce command, but there obtained our liberty, by valiant Jack's victorious hand." Hardly had the ring been presented, and the guests had applauded, before into the hall rushed a messenger to say that Hundel, a savage giant with 2 heads, having heard of the death of his brethren, was coming full of fury, and with great strides to take revenge. This news put a stop to all mirth, and a shudder ran through the company. Jack, nothing daunted, drew his sword of sharpness, and said, "Let him come. Let the guests assemble on the battlements of the castle, and see how I will deal with this fellow." To this they all agreed. Now round the castle was a moat that was very deep, and was crossed by a drawbridge to the gates. Jack ordered this drawbridge to be lowered, and set some men to saw the beams nearly through. Then putting on his invisible cloak, and taking his sword, he went against the giant, who was turning his noses, for he had 2, in every direction, and was snuffing the breeze and saying, "Fee, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. Whether he be alive or whether he be dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread." When Jack heard this, he said, "You must catch me first." "Where are you?" asked the giant, looking about. Then Jack threw off his cloak of invisibility, and put on his shoes of swiftness, and ran. The giant came pounding after him, making the earth shake under his tramp. Jack made him run after him 3 times round the castle, that the guests might have a good sight of the monster. Then with a sudden dart he crossed the drawbridge, and ran in at the gate. The giant at once pursued him, but no sooner was he in the middle of the bridge, than the beams that had been nearly sawn through gave way, and he fell headlong into the moat. Jack then ordered a strong rope to be brought him, and he cast nooses around the giants' heads, and by the aid of horses drew him up to the edge of the moat, and then cut off his 2 heads. All the spectators rejoiced, and praised Jack for his great cleverness and courage. He remained 2 or 3 days with his host, and then set off in search of fresh adventures. He travelled over hill and dale unmolested till he reached the foot of a great mountain, where he saw a little hut, at the door of which he knocked. The door opened, and a venerable old man with a snow-white beard stood there. Jack respectfully asked if he might be sheltered for the night. The old man was a hermit, and he invited him in, and set before him some bread and fruit. Whilst he was eating, the hermit said, "I perceive that you are the brave Cornishman who has destroyed so many giants. Now on the top of this mountain is an enchanted castle, kept by a giant called Galligant, who, by the help of a vile magician, gets many knights and ladies into his castle, where he changes them into owls, ravens, bats, and other noxious birds and animals. I lament above all the fate of a duke's daughter, whom they seized whilst walking in her father's garden, and they have turned her into a deer. Many knights have tried to destroy the enchantment and deliver her, yet none have been able to do so, because of 2 fiery dragons that guard the entrance to the castle. But you have got the cloak of invisibility, and can pass by them unperceived. On the gates of the castle you will find engraved some words that will tell you how you may break the enchantment." Jack promised that, in the morning, at the risk of his life, he would attempt this adventure. Accordingly, next day, he put on the cloak of invisibility, and descended the mountain-side. He saw the 2 dragons, but because of his mantle they could not see him, and he passed between them unmolested. On the castle gate hung a golden trumpet, and under it was written these lines: "Whoever can this trumpet blow will cause the giant's overthrow." As soon as Jack had read this, he seized the trumpet, and blew such a shrill blast that the gates burst open, and the walls of the castle trembled. The giant and magician now knew that their evil course was at an end, and they stood biting their thumbs and shaking with fear. Jack, with his sword of sharpness, soon killed the giant, but it was a less easy matter to subdue the magician, for he turned himself into various shapes. Jack did not know what had become of him. Until the magician was overcome, those who had been transformed by him could not be released. But he put on his cap of wisdom, and at once discovered that the magician had changed himself into a little ant, and was creeping away between his feet. He immediately raised his foot to stamp on him, when the magician became a hare and fled like an arrow. Jack put on his shoes of fleetness and went after him, when all at once the magician changed into a knot of thread. Jack knew him, because he had on his cap of wisdom, so with his sword of sharpness he cut the knot, and the magician was dead. Then all the knights and ladies who had been transformed into noxious birds resumed their proper forms, as did also the Duke's daughter, who thanked Jack on her knees for her deliverance. The head of the giant Galligant was sent to King Arthur, who invited Jack to his court, made him Knight of the Round Table, and gave him to wife the daughter of the Duke whom he had delivered. Notes: Jack the Giant Killer. This is a genuine old English chapbook tale, and is to be compared with others in other languages, where a man of small stature, by his adroitness and superior wits, overcomes men larger and more powerful than himself. It is probably a reminiscence of a struggle between two races, the one small and the other of greater bulk. End of section 18.